The doctor was about to begin an examination in the morgue, but the girl who had been declared dead whispered something. The doctor was frightened by what she said, dropped the scalpel, and ran to call the police. The cold light of the morgue flickered and hummed, cutting through the silence like a knife. It was early evening when Dr. Alonso Mena arrived, tired as always. He had spent the whole day at the hospital dealing with reports, paperwork, and 2 difficult bodies. He just wanted to finish up quickly and go home, but when he opened the metal door of the refrigerated chamber, something inside him stopped. On the steel stretcher, covered with a white sheet, was the body that had just arrived. A thin little girl with dark hair stuck to her forehead, still damp. She was about 10 or 11 years old, according to the paper tied to her ankle. The report was straightforward. Respiratory failure. Death confirmed at 4:42, Santa Rita Rural Hospital. But her name was not there. It only said unidentified female. Alonso approached slowly, pulled back the sheet, and looked for a few seconds. What he had always tried to avoid happened. He felt it. He really felt it. Something strange in his chest. An unnamed anguish, because her face, although pale, did not look dead. Her closed eyes were narrowed, as if they were still trying to understand what had happened. Her mouth was half open, as if she had tried to ask for help, but no one heard her. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes tightly, and shook his head as if to get rid of a bad thought, but it didn't work. That image stuck with him. It wasn't just another body. It wasn't routine. So young, he murmured. He grabbed the file with the admission form. There were errors. It didn't say the name of the mother, the father, or any accompanying person. No phone number. No medical notes other than the dry report and the signature. It looked burned, but what really bothered Alonso was the way the girl was lying. Although her body wasn't moving, it didn't seem relaxed as it normally does after death. Her little arms were curled up, her hands clenched into small fists. She had scrapes on her knees and a small purple mark on the side of her forehead. He swallowed, touched the girl's forehead with the back of his fingers. It was cold, but less than normal. He touched her arm, then touched her hand, and remained silent for a few seconds, trying to understand. He felt a slight pain in his chest, a discomfort that mixed pain, fear, and an old memory he always tried to forget. "What happened to you, huh?" he whispered, not expecting an answer. The room became even colder and even quieter. He moved away a little, leaned on the table, and stared, trying to convince himself that it was just another body, that the report was fine, that there was nothing strange, but he couldn't. Because even there in that room where only those who have already left enter, that girl seemed to be asking for help. He placed the instruments on the metal table, carefully grabbed the sheet, positioned the lamp, and prepared to examine the body before any procedure. He gently brushed the hair away from her face, and then stopped. He touched her left arm. The skin was not as cold as he thought. It was warm, a little as if the heat was struggling not to leave. Alonso quickly removed his hand, frightened by his own thought, then touched her again, pressing lightly with 2 fingers. The temperature was not that of a corpse that had been dead for hours. No, he whispered to himself, shaking his head. It's fatigue. I'm tired, that's all. Even so, his heart was already beating faster. He approached hesitantly, leaned over the body, and looked at the girl's chest. It wasn't moving, but something inside him insisted. "Touch her neck again," said the voice he wanted to ignore. With trembling fingers, he touched her gently just below the jaw. 1, 2 seconds. Nothing. 3, 4. Then he felt it. It was so weak that he thought he had imagined it. A tiny pulse like a drop slowly falling into an empty bucket. Alonso held his breath and counted again. 1, 2, there it was. A second of life. A heartbeat. Almost nothing, but it was life. "My God," he said, his voice trembling. He quickly took off his gloves and touched again, more firmly. There it was. an irregular but real pulse. He recoiled in fear and looked at the girl, her body motionless, her eyes closed. But the heat hidden there screamed louder than the silence of the morgue. "This isn't possible," he muttered, running his hand over his face and breathing rapidly. Now sweat began to form on his forehead. He looked around as if waiting for someone to say it was a joke, that it was a mistake. But he was alone with a girl who, according to everyone, was dead, but whose body refused to give up. Alonso held the scalpel firmly, but the heart no longer obeyed. It beat too fast. The girl's pulse could still be felt in his fingers, like a call, like a sign that something there was not right. He tried to stay focused, to follow protocol, but every second there was like walking on a tightrope. Then he heard it, a small, broken sound, almost a whisper, but the scalpel fell to the floor with a sharp thud. Alonso froze, the blood running cold in his veins. He looked around, thinking he was going crazy, but then he looked back at the girl. Her fingers moved slowly, as if trying to escape from a nightmare. Her lips parted slightly, and again that sound, a faint moan, like someone waking up from a dark place. "Hello?" he asked, unable to control the tremor in his voice. Silence. The room was so quiet that he could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. He didn't think twice. "Help!" he shouted. "I need help!" He ran out into the cold hospital corridors, carrying the girl's light body in his arms, now showing signs of life, her eyes still closed, her breathing weak, almost invisible, but alive. The emergency room doors flew open, and nurses came running, frightened by the way Alonso had entered. "She's alive! She's alive!" he shouted. "Bring the equipment! Quick!" They put the girl on the stretcher, an oxygen mask, an IV, a monitor. The head doctor, a serious woman with a strong voice, looked at the signs and let out a heavy sigh. "There's a heartbeat, faint but real. She's alive." Alonso took a step back, his legs feeling weak. "If it weren't for today," she continued, looking at him, "tomorrow she would have truly died." He leaned against the wall, trying to understand everything. The scalpel still echoed in his head. The sound, the fingers moving, the whisper, and now that phrase, "to die and be buried." She was minutes away from being forgotten, from being buried like so many others without a name. But she wasn't, because she whispered, because someone heard her, and because that night he didn't ignore the silence. The next day, Alonso went to the rural hospital where they had issued the girl's death certificate. The place was small, with narrow corridors, walls stained by time, and a silent reception desk. He arrived with the papers in his hand, his heart heavy and his head full of questions. He showed the certificate to the receptionist and asked for the patient's file. She typed calmly, but soon grimaced. "There is no record. Nothing about any girl here." "Impossible," said Alonso, already impatient. "How can you declare a girl dead without a single piece of paper?" The woman shrugged uncomfortably and said she would call the supervisor. Minutes later, an older nurse with a tired face appeared with a crooked badge and a thin folder in her hands. "Dr. Mena, you're talking about the girl who arrived the day before yesterday in the ambulance?" "Yes, the one who was declared dead from respiratory arrest." The nurse paused for a long time and looked down. "Look, there was no family. The ambulance arrived alone, with no one accompanying her, just the unconscious girl. We were told by radio that she was found on the street. An anonymous call, nothing more. And who signed the certificate?" She leafed through the folder and showed him a copy of the document. "It says here that it was Dr. Lujan, but she's been on sick leave for 2 weeks. She hasn't worked here since then." A heavy silence fell between them, the two of them. Alonso held the paper as if it were something dirty. His mouth felt dry. How could that be? How could someone who wasn't working sign it? The nurse just shook her head. She didn't know how to explain it. She said the paper arrived with the ambulance. A nurse from the previous shift received it and entered it directly into the system without checking anything. "We didn't check her vital signs," she said quietly. She was pale, unresponsive. "We thought it was too late, but they didn't check. They didn't listen. She didn't respond. She just pressed her lips together, ashamed, afraid." Alonzo saw it all in her eyes. Back at the hospital, Alonzo drove slowly. Nothing added up. The signature was from someone who wasn't even there. There was no file, no family. A girl alone in an ambulance, thrown away like trash, declared dead without any real examination. How could that happen? It wasn't just a mistake. It was deeper, uglier. Deep down, he knew it. Someone wanted that girl to be forgotten, and they almost succeeded. It was almost dawn. It was silent. Alonzo walked through the hospital corridors, as if carrying a weight he couldn't explain. He hadn't slept for hours. But then again, who could? That girl intubated in the ICU was a mystery that hurt deeply. That's when he saw the quick, silent shadow passing through the glass door of the restricted area. "Hello," he called, but no one answered. He approached slowly. In the fogged glass, a thin, fragile figure next to the bed. It was a young woman with uncombed hair, as if she hadn't used a brush in days, wearing baggy, stained clothes and worn-out, almost broken sandals. She didn't touch the girl, just looked at her with eyes full of tears, but without making a sound. She cried silently, like someone who had already learned that screaming was useless. Alonzo stopped at the door. "Ma'am," he said softly and carefully. The woman was startled. She turned quickly, and before he could say anything else, she ran out, pushing him aside as she passed and disappearing down the hallways like a ghost, leaving only the sound of her hurried footsteps and a faint smell of old soap. He ran after her but couldn't catch up with her. When he returned to the ICU, his heart still racing, he saw something on the chair next to the girl's bed. A crumpled piece of paper, dirty around the edges. He picked it up carefully and opened it slowly. It was a drawing made with colored pencils. A simple house, a crooked chimney, and two figures, a woman and a girl, both crying. At the top was a phrase written in large letters, as if by a child. "Mommy, don't leave me again." Alonzo felt a lump in his throat. He stood there holding that piece of paper as if it were glass, his eyes filled with tears, because it said more than any file ever could, more than any report. It was the pain of someone who had already been abandoned before, who had already asked not to be abandoned, who already knew abandonment, and now was perhaps about to be abandoned again. The next day, Alonzo left early, before sunrise. He had hardly slept, spending the night with that drawing in his hand, the childish lines, the phrase that hurt. "Mommy, don't leave me again." He couldn't get it out of his head. He had to understand. He needed to see with his own eyes the place where it all began, or where it all almost ended. He grabbed the car and drove to the address of the ambulance written on the hospital papers. The street was narrow, hidden between two old buildings with cracked floors and a strong smell of wet garbage. Some windows were boarded up. Others had dirty rags hanging like curtains. It was a place no one paid attention to. He got out of the car, slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. He looked around, feeling the thick, suffocating air, as if the place held a dirty secret. And then he saw it. An alleyway further back, with a small, lonely house with a peeling green door. The wood at the entrance was broken, as if someone had pushed it hard. Alonzo approached. The gate creaked when he pushed it. "Hello, good morning. Is anyone there?" he said in a low voice. Silence. At the dirty courtyard full of broken toys and pieces of plastic, and right at the entrance to the house, he saw dark drops on the cement floor. Blood that had dried long ago, but was still there. A trace. His heart sank. He entered carefully. The living room was small, with a broken armchair, an old TV on the floor, and a towel hanging on a makeshift clothesline. Everything smelled of dampness and neglect. The walls were scratched, the floor was covered in dust, but there was something there, something belonging to a little girl, a small sandal, an armless doll lying near the armchair, a school backpack forgotten in a corner. "My God," he murmured, his voice stuck in his throat. Every detail of that house told a story without words, a story of fear, haste, pain, the broken door, the blood on the floor, the toys scattered as if someone had suddenly left, fleeing. But fleeing from what? Alonso went deeper into the house, and each step was like crossing a silent cry. The smell of dampness and abandonment was embedded in the walls. The windows had cracks, some covered with old newspapers. Inside, the silence was so heavy it hurt his ears. The floor was covered with marks, torn papers, discarded clothes, and dried food scraps on a forgotten plate. But what hurt the most to see were the toys. There was a blue toy car without wheels, a coloring book with torn pages, and in the corner of the living room, a rag doll with its face scratched with a black pen. It wasn't a child's scratch. It was anger, hatred. The doll's mouth was scratched up to its eyes, as if someone wanted it to never speak or see anything again. Alonso bent down and touched the doll, and felt the torn fabric. He took a deep breath, and his stomach turned. In the room, there was only a thin mattress without sheets, stuck directly to the cement floor, a dirty blanket, a crushed pillow in a corner near the wall, and a faded purple backpack. He approached it. It had a small key ring hanging from it, and the name Maria B. embroidered on one side. Alonso bent down carefully, opened the zipper of the backpack. Inside were old notebooks, broken pencils, a torn pencil case, and at the bottom, a school notebook, like the ones teachers use to send messages. The cover was blue with little star drawings, and right in the center, once again, the name Maria Belen. He opened it. The first pages had normal notes. Then came the small, scratched-out messages written in a hurry with shaky letters. Elea screams, "I'm scared. I don't want to go back to that house. My mom cries every night." Alonso closed his eyes and stood there holding that notebook as if it were a stifled scream. His breathing became short, his chest tight. It was like reading a silent confession, a plea from someone so small that she could only write because no one listened to her. He sat on the floor, leaned against the wall, and stayed like that for a few minutes, looking at the backpack, the mattress, the scratched doll. Everything was so wrong, so unfair. The life of a girl hidden in a corner of a house that seemed more like a hiding place for pain. The pain there was not loud. There were no screams on the walls, but everything screamed. That was the house of silent screams, and now he knew it, and could no longer pretend he didn't. Alonso arrived at the school that appeared in the notebooks at mid-morning, a simple building with peeling paint and a dusty playground. Children played, shouting and running back and forth as if the world were still light, but he carried a weight that gave him no rest. He showed his badge at the office and explained that he was a doctor and needed to speak to a teacher who knew Maria Belen. "Ah, Maria," said the receptionist, lowering her voice. "Room 2. Talk to the teacher, Rosa." The hallway was long, with colorful drawings stuck on the walls, and the sound of pencils scratching on paper. Alonso knocked on the door carefully. A woman with her hair tied back and tired eyes opened it. "Good morning. My name is Alonso. I'm a doctor. I need to talk to you about one of your students, Maria Belen." Her expression changed immediately. Her eyes widened. She made room and asked him to come in. "Did something happen to Maria? Is she okay?" He hesitated. He couldn't say much. He just responded with a sad look. "Do you remember her?" "How could I forget her?" said the teacher, sitting down slowly. She was always quiet, arriving silently, staying in a corner, never fighting with anyone. But she stopped, took a random piece of paper from the table, and began to fold it between her fingers, as if seeking courage in that gesture. But she always came in with bruises on her face, arms, and back. I often asked her about it, and she would look down and say she had fallen. She fell almost every day. We reported it. Yes, more than once we talked to the administration. They said they would try to contact the family, but no one came. Her mother came from time to time, but she seemed as scared as she was. Her eyes were those of someone who has already suffered a lot in life, and not just with her hands. Alonso listened silently to every word the teacher said. Adding to what he already knew, the puzzle was taking shape, and the image that appeared hurt a lot. Maria wrote things in the drawings. The teacher continued. She didn't just color them, she left little hidden messages. Once she drew a house on fire with a girl locked inside. At the bottom it said, "I want to get out." The teacher paused, her eyes filled with tears. "I tried to help, doctor. I swear I tried. But one is only a teacher. There's a limit to what you can do when no one listens." Alonso gripped the edge of the chair tightly, his chest tight. He felt as if he was hearing an old cry, stifled for years, and that only now had someone stopped to listen. "Thank you, teacher," he said in a low voice. "I just needed to understand who she was before all this." And in that moment, everything became clear. Maria wasn't just a beaten girl. She was a girl who tried to ask for help with the few means she had. Drawings, silence, glances. And no one listened to her in time. Almost no one. It was too late when the light began to fade through the hospital windows. Of the hospital when she appeared again. Alonso was sitting in the reception area, tired, reviewing notes, trying to piece together everything he knew up to that point. And then he felt it, that presence that brings pain before a single word is spoken. It was her, the woman with the broken gaze. But this time, something was different. Her steps were slow but steady, her eyes still red but not dull. She was wearing the same dirty clothes as last time, but there was a kind of courage in every movement, as if something inside her had awakened. She stood in front of him, looked him in the eyes, and her voice broke as she said, "My name is Lucia. I am Maria's mother." Alonso said nothing, only stood up, his throat tight. It was like seeing the drawing of the girl come to life right there in front of him. Lucia sat down, her hands trembling in her lap, and then, without him asking, she began to speak. "I thought she was dead," she said, and her voice broke into a dry sob. "They forced me to leave her." She paused, took a deep breath, and continued between sobs. "My brother, he's lived with me since my parents died. The house was theirs. I got it too, but he drinks, and when he drinks he changes. He yells at us, he hits me, he hits her." Alonso listened silently, each word like a stab in the heart. "I tried to leave. One day I grabbed Maria and we went and we slept in an abandoned house. We ate stale bread, but we had nowhere to go. No one would help us, and I had to go back. I thought he would change. I just wanted Maria to have a roof over her head." She was shaking. Her fingers were clenched tightly, as if trying to hold on to the guilt. "That day he came home drunk, shouting. He broke things. I took Maria and we ran away. She couldn't take it anymore. She fell in the street and fainted. My brother was scared. He said it was his fault. He wanted to hide everything. He told me to shut up, that if I talked, it would be worse." Alonso closed his eyes. The lump in his throat almost prevented him from breathing. Lucia was crying now, her face in her hands. Ugly, wet tears coming from deep inside. I didn't want to leave her. I didn't want to. He approached, sat down next to her, and said calmly, "Lucia, she's alive. She's fighting, but she needs you." She lifted her face, her eyes frightened, a little light amid the despair. "She's alive, yes, and now you have to fight for her too." Lucia felt it slowly, and there, in the middle of that hospital, amid the chaos of life, a broken woman began to rebuild herself. It wasn't strength, it was love, fear, guilt, all together, but it was also courage, the most difficult kind of all. The courage to return, to face what she had avoided for so long. The courage to be a mother, even after the fear, after Lucia's story. Alonso spent the night awake. Something still didn't add up. Something heavy was hidden, and he knew where to look within the hospital itself. The next morning, he went straight to the administrative area and requested full access to the girl's medical records. Dates, names, times, everything. He didn't want assumptions. He wanted proof. He spent hours reviewing the system files, spreadsheets, shifts, digital reports. When he found the record of the supposed doctor who signed the certificate, something caught his eye. According to the document, Dr. Lujan was on duty the day the girl was declared dead, but Alonso had already heard another name in that rural hospital, a name that did not appear there. He accessed the internal medical leave records, and there it was. Dr. Lujan had requested leave 2 weeks before the date of death. So how could someone who was not working sign a death certificate? He went to the hospital administration and asked for an explanation. No one knew, or pretended not to know. One said that the signature could have been pre-approved, another that the system was old. But the truth was simple. The certificate had been forged. Alonso went further and investigated the doctor's history, and then he found the connection. Dr. Lujan had been the girlfriend of the man Lucia had identified as her attacker for more than 2 years. Her own brother had photos of the two on social media, events they had attended together, even affectionate comments between them. A chill ran down Alonso's spine. The same man who terrorized his sister had a doctor by his side, a professional who, instead of protecting him, used her signature to hide the truth. And now, she had disappeared. The administration said she had gone on a trip. Others said they hadn't seen her in days. Her cell phone was off, and according to neighbors, the house where she lived had been empty since last week. Alonso left the hospital with trembling hands, a feeling of helplessness in his chest, but also a certainty that this was not just a mistake. It was a crime, and someone had to answer for it. Because when a hospital remains silent, pain becomes a habit, and injustice is given a badge. He looked up at the cloudy sky and felt the wind on his face. That girl could not be just another one. Alonso was left alone in the hospital break room, sitting on a wooden bench that creaked with every movement. The light was dim, the windows closed, and the distant noise of the ICU monitors filled the air like a reminder that the girl was still fighting. He had his eyes downcast and his head heavy when Lucia entered slowly, her steps still uncertain, but her eyes alert. She stood at the door and said nothing. "You can come in," he murmured without looking up. She approached and sat down on the chair next to him in silence. They remained like that for a few minutes, two strangers sharing a pain that still had no name, until she spoke. "You have done so much for my daughter. No one has ever done so much for us." Alonso took a deep breath and felt his throat close up. He wanted to respond, but the words were far away. "It's not just for her," he said softly, his voice hoarse. "It's because 5 years ago, I also lost a daughter." Lucia slowly turned her face, surprised. She was 15 years old. Her name was Sophia, an intelligent, curious angel. She paused, her eyes already beginning to shine. "One day we went to a farm on a holiday. We were near a river. She wanted to swim. I said yes. She knew how to swim, but a fast current came and I couldn't reach her." There was silence. Her hand trembled. Those minutes lasted a lifetime. When they pulled her out of the water, it was too late. Lucia carefully placed her hand on his. "Since then," he continued, his voice breaking, "I stopped feeling. I stopped caring. I started working more, hiding during shifts, avoiding children, avoiding everything that reminded me of her." He closed his eyes as if fighting against something that was coming from within, until that girl appeared. Maria, weak, alone, lying there like trash, and her gaze was the same as my daughter before going to sleep. A silent plea, a "stay with me," and I didn't finish the sentence. Emotion choked him. Tears came without asking permission. They weren't exaggerated. They were clean, calm, old, the kind that are kept for years behind pride and guilt. Lucia squeezed his hand, so it wasn't just her who came back to life. Alonso looked at her with eyes full of tears. A sad, beautiful smile escaped from her face. Maria awakens something in me that I thought had died along with my daughter, and there in that silent hospital room, between two wounded hearts, something changed. It wasn't just the fight for a child. It was also a reunion with what had been lost in time. They talked for over an hour until they left the room. The next day, Lucia disappeared. It was a typical morning, one of those mornings when the hospital seemed to run on autopilot. Nurses walking back and forth, discreet alarms ringing in the rooms, doctors with tired eyes. But when Alonso passed by the family room, something felt strange. The chair where Lucia used to sit was empty. The blanket she used at night was folded in a corner, and her scent, that soft perfume of simple soap, was also gone. He asked the nurses, and one said she saw her leave at the end of the night. Another said she hadn't seen anything. They went to check the security cameras, and there was Lucia, led away by a tall man wearing a cap with a hood covering part of his face. She walked quickly without looking back, but there was something strange about her shoulders, tension in her steps, fear. "She didn't leave alone," said Alonso, staring at the frozen image. That same day, the girl woke up. Alonso was sitting next to the bed, the ICU lights dim, the monitors silent. Then, in a whisper so soft, it seemed like a dream, he heard, "Where's Mommy?" He got up immediately, his heart racing. Her eyes were open, small and tired, but alive, alive, alive. "Maria," he whispered, almost not believing it. "You're awake." She tried to move her head, but she was too weak. Her eyes searched anxiously. Her voice came out low and raspy, as if her vocal cords were broken. "Mommy!" Alonso took her hand and squeezed it with force. He felt her fragility, her warmth. He wanted to say so many things, but only one sentence came out. "I promise I'll find her." The girl closed her eyes again, but she didn't fall asleep. She just let a tear fall from the corner of her face. Her hand didn't let go of his. Alonso stood there without moving, his eyes full of tears, because at that moment, he was no longer just a doctor, no longer just someone who took care of a body. Now he was the last bridge between that girl and the only person she loved in the world. Alonso returned to that house as if returning to a haunted place. The same crooked gate, the same heavy silence, but now he had a different purpose. He needed answers. Lucia had disappeared, and Maria had woken up with a broken heart, asking for her mother. He couldn't wait any longer. He crossed the yard, dodging pieces of toys, and entered carefully, as if the air itself were too fragile to touch. Every step echoed. The house was the same as before, empty, dirty, smelling of dust and abandonment. He went to the room, looked at the backpack again, checked the drawers. Nothing new, until in a corner of the broken shelf he saw a small object covered in dust, a music box. It was simple, pink with faded stickers. When he opened it, he heard a sweet, slow melody, as if childhood still lived inside, even though hurt. But Alonso noticed something strange. The bottom of the box sounded hollow, as if it were hiding something. He carefully pried it open. The wood creaked and a piece came loose. Inside, wrapped in an old rag, was a small memory chip. His heart raced. He got up and returned to the hospital without saying a word. He asked the technical team for a computer, inserted the chip, and there they were, the videos, one by one. In the first one, Maria was sitting on the floor, her back against the wall, crying softly. In the background, A man's voice shouted profanities, calling the girl horrible names and telling her to shut up. In another video, the same voice threatened, "If you say anything, you won't leave this house." The camera was shaking. It was clear that someone had hidden the cell phone to record. In one of the last videos, Lucia appeared, frightened, trying to calm the man down. She said he was drunk and to leave the girl alone. He pushed her against the wall. Maria screamed. Alonso closed the laptop, his hand shaking. The images were etched in his mind. This was more than violence. It was proof. It was a cry. It was what he needed to name his fear. He looked at the ceiling, holding back tears. Maria had hidden this alone, afraid, in pain, but still hoping that someone would find it someday. And now someone had found it. Now no one could pretend they didn't know. They had seen it. The next day, Alonso went to the prosecutor's office with the chip clenched in his hand, like someone carrying a heart outside their chest. He entered with determination, passed the reception desk, and climbed the stairs without looking at anyone. When he reached the prosecutor's office, he didn't ask for permission. He just put the chip on the table. "Here's everything," he said firmly. "This is proof. This is pain. This is the truth." The prosecutor watched the videos in silence, not saying a word, only the sound of the music box playing in the background and the screams in the video. When he finished, he closed the computer slowly and said only, "We're going to take action." That same night, the police surrounded the neighborhood. In a nearby bar, the man was there, drunk and sweaty, as if the world had ended. He didn't resist or scream, he just looked at the floor. When the police told him that Maria was alive, he slumped down, ran his hands over his face, and muttered, I thought she was dead, that I had," but he didn't finish. It wasn't regret. It was fear, relief at not having killed her, perhaps. But he wasn't innocent. He knew what he had done, and now he couldn't hide. He was arrested, guilty of assault, threats, kidnapping, and child abandonment. His name was in the newspapers, but what weighed most heavily was the truth that now had a name and a face. Maria. The doctor was also found. She tried to deny everything, saying she didn't know about the video, that she only wanted to help her boyfriend. But her signature was there, the lie was there, and now justice was there too. Lucia was found hours later when her brother told everything in a remote warehouse in the countryside. She was lying there, weak, with a swollen face and broken ribs, but alive. When the police found her, she only murmured one thing, "Maria is fine." Alonso received the news at the hospital. His legs gave way. He held onto the wall and cried alone in the hallway. But for the first time, it was a cry of relief because now, after so much silence, so much pain, so much waiting, justice had arrived. And although it came late, it came as it should have, with a voice, with strength, with a name, with truth. The room was small, smelling of alcohol and wilted flowers. Alonso was next to the bed, waiting. Maria was sitting, looking toward the door. Her hair was tied back in a weak ponytail, and she was still breathing slowly. Her eyes seemed larger, as if time had grown inside them. The sound of the doorknob turning was almost inaudible. Lucia entered with short, careful steps, her face still swollen, her arms covered in bruises, a bandage on her left side. She walked slowly, as if crossing a dream that could end at any moment. When she saw her daughter, she stopped. Maria did not speak, nor did she. For a second, the world fell silent. The hospital machines disappeared. Time stood still, and then Maria got out of bed with effort, her feet touching the floor, fragile, and she took one step, 2, 3. Lucia fell to her knees before her daughter reached her. "Forgive me," she whispered, but the words didn't come out. Maria hugged her mother tightly, the two small, injured, broken bodies clinging to each other as if trying to put the pieces of the other back together. The girl cried without making a sound, only tears. Lucia trembled, her arms tightening as if she were afraid the world would take her away again. They said nothing. It wasn't necessary. The embrace said it all. It conveyed the sadness, the fear, the pain that remained on the walls of that house on the night they almost lost each other forever. The miracle of still being alive. Alonso stood on the corner, watching in silence, his eyes full, his heart tight, because at that moment he saw two broken souls recognizing each other, and he saw that despite everything, despite the terror of violence, of all the injustice, love still existed, and it was strong, strong enough to keep them standing, even if trembling, because sometimes a hug is enough, a hug that heals what the world tried to break. On paper, it was just a form, a sheet full of spaces to fill in, name, date, ID number, relationship. But in Alonso's hands, it trembled, as if it weighed more than it should. He was sitting in a cold courtroom that smelled of stale coffee and printer ink. Maria was next to him, wearing a borrowed sweater, swinging her legs under the chair. She looked at everything with curiosity, but squeezed his hand tightly. His presence was still the only safe place she knew. The judge was a calm man, with crooked glasses and a wise gaze. He took the folder, glanced at the papers, and read the request from the hospital. "You are registering Maria Belen as a dependent for health insurance, correct?" Alonso nodded quickly. "Yes, it's temporary, just to ensure she has medical care, therapy, everything she needs right now." The judge looked at him over his glasses. "I understand, but there is one detail," he said in a calm voice. "The law allows temporary guardianship only for a certain period of time. After that, there must be a permanent guardian, someone who says, 'I'll take her.'" He paused for a long time. "Dr. Alonso, do you agree to be the girl's legal guardian?" Silence filled the room like an echo. Maria looked at him. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him, and in that look was all the fear of being left again, the memory of abandonment, the hidden desire to belong to someone, to be someone's. Alonso didn't respond, not with words. He turned slightly in his chair and picked up Maria as he had done with his daughter many years ago. He hugged her tightly, and the girl put her face against his chest and closed her eyes. She stayed there. The judge said nothing more. He just signed, because in that gesture was the answer. There was no statement more true than that hug, and in that moment, Maria was no longer just a girl rescued from death. She was someone with a name, with a surname, and with someone who was finally going to stay. The countryside was quiet. There were no sirens, no corridor, no clocks making noise, just the sound of the wind moving the leaves, the smell of wet earth, and the big blue sky. Alonso had his hands dirty with soil, kneeling in front of a row of newly planted flowers, yellow roses like the ones Sophia liked. He ran his fingers carefully over the petals, then wiped the sweat from his face with his shirt sleeve. There, far from the city, time passed slowly, and that was fine, after all. He asked to leave the hospital. He made the decision without fear, because now he knew what he wanted, to care for life, not death. He went to live in a borrowed little ranch with Lucia and Maria, 3 wounded hearts trying to start over. The days were simple. Lucia cooked calmly. Maria ran among the trees with her hair blowing in the wind. Sometimes she climbed onto a rock and stayed there, looking at the horizon, as if she were watching over the future. Alonso sowed seeds and tended the garden. He learned to bake bread, and when he laughed, the sound was soft, like someone who had learned to breathe again. At night, they would have dinner together under the yellow light of the porch. There were no luxuries, but there was peace. And for someone who had had the world ripped from his hands, peace is a miracle. There, in the middle of nowhere, Alonso's heart, which had once been only tired, cold silence, now beat differently, a living heartbeat, the heartbeat of someone who no longer gives up. The dirt road led to the small cemetery surrounded by short trees and a silence that no longer weighed heavily. Alonso drove slowly. Maria sat in the passenger seat, holding a flower in her hands, a white daisy cut from her garden that morning. It was simple, but full of meaning. She didn't even have to explain. She just said, "I want to bring something beautiful." When they arrived, Alonso got out first, opened the door for her, and took her hand carefully. They walked side by side among the old graves, the dry leaves crunching underfoot. The sky was gray, but it didn't look like rain. It was one of those quiet days that demand respect. They stopped in front of a light wooden cross with a name engraved in small letters. Sofia Mena, 2003-2018. Alonso took a deep breath and remained silent for a few seconds. His eyes were no longer crying, but they weren't dry either. They were full of everything that couldn't be said. Maria looked at the grave as if she knew someone important, and she did. She was beautiful, wasn't she? She asked softly. Very, Alonso replied with a tired smile. She had your eyes when she laughed. She bent down and placed the flower slowly with both hands. She remained crouched there, looking at the cross, and then, without looking at him, she said, "Thank you for bringing me here." Alonso crouched down next to her, looked ahead, then turned to look at her, and said with a trembling voice, "I present to you your soul, sister." Maria looked at him in surprise and said nothing, just rested her head on his shoulder. They stayed like that for a while that no one measured. And there, between the past and the present, two girls lived in the heart of one man. One rested, the other began again, and now neither of them was alone. And if it were your daughter, if you saw a small, cold body declared dead, would you have the courage to listen to the silence, to trust your instinct, to defy death, the police, and even reason itself? Because sometimes what seems dead is just waiting for someone to believe, someone to stay, someone who won't give up. Alonso believed, Lucia resisted, and Maria lived. Now tell me, what would you do in their place? Would you have listened to the whisper? Would you have had the courage to face so many things for a life that was almost extinguished? Comment below. Really, tell me what touched you most about this story, and what you would do if it were someone in your family, or if you were Maria herself. If this story moved you, activate the bell, because there are more real, vivid stories coming that touch the heart and make us think again about what love is, what it means to have courage, and what it means not to turn our backs. Before you leave, click on the video that is appearing on the screen now. It is a very moving story about a father who is reunited with his missing son after 20 years. It has already made many people cry and look at their own lives with new eyes. Go see it. You have to see it.